Sorry, I didn't.
No,
I
no,
didn't want
thank
to
you.
interrupt.
Thank you for saying it because I wouldn't have remembered. That's why I told someone to do it. Okay. Recording's going. Okay, good. So Hobbes sees language, he sees morality, which is the thing that binds people together or divides people, as a function of the creative function of language. Number one. Let me ask this. When we talk about the creative function of language, what the heck are we talking about? We said there's two primary functions that the author of Sapiens talks about, and they're able of forming two different types of communities. There's a first function which is capable of establishing small communities, but when you establish larger ones, even like nations and empires, that function of language will not work, and you need the creative function of language to bring people together under a common way of life. What's the creative? Well, first of all, what are the two functions of language we talked about last week?
Descriptive and creative.
It's creative and what else?
Descriptive.
Yeah,
Descriptive.
descriptive. Let's start with the easy one. What's the descriptive function? So when we say the function of language, obviously we know it's about communication, right? Language is a public thing. It's used for communicating with other people, relevant information. And in the evolutionary context, it's all about the game of survival, right? So we're giving each other information that's going to be beneficial to getting by in life in one form or another. And whether you're in the realm of evolution or whether you're in the realm of New York City, really serves a very similar function. But we're not concerned with self-preservation. We're concerned with success, right? Because we don't have to worry as much as a hunter and gatherer or something about self-preservation. So the descriptive function of language is about what? What does it do?
Represent the concrete facts and relations of the world.
Yeah, good. So the descriptive function represents, it literally represents in language, just concrete facts, empirical facts, material facts of the world, right? Like something happened this morning at 8 o'clock on the corner of Dustin Street, and, I don't know, there was a car accident, whatever it was, all kind of basic physical facts. And so the descriptive function is a very kind of journalistic function, right? It describes things, is important, describes things that are already there. The creative function does what? What is that one all about? Because that's the one we're really interested in, quite frankly.
Talks about myth, fiction stuff.
Yeah, so Harari, the author, talks about the creative function produces myths and fictions and so on. But what are we really talking about when we're talking about myths and fictions? It may not be what we normally would describe as myths and fictions. What are some examples that will help illustrate the concept?
Stories of gods.
Yeah, gods. I mean, if you're a Christian, do you say the Bible? See, here's the catch. If you're a Christian, a believing Christian, do you say that the Bible is a story of a God? No, you say it is the word of God, right? You don't call it a story, although it is a story, right? See, so Harari is acknowledging the fictive or mythic nature of many of these concepts from his scientific point of view. But the point is, these things, these so-called fictions, are very real to humanity. People live and die for them, like God, like Nate. Let's just give some examples. Like ones he calls a nation a fiction, because for him, and he's correct in this, a nation isn't just a bunch of people living on a swath of geography with boundaries. If you ask yourself, what do the boundaries of a nation really represent, right? They really don't just represent a separation from here and there, right? What they really separate is a whole way of life, a set of beliefs, And in particular, if you're thinking political boundaries, uh, the beginning and end of the sovereignty of one nation to the other, one government to the other. One lives by these laws that they passed in their legislature, and another lives by those laws that they've passed in their legislature. And the very idea of a nation transcends geographic boundaries. It transcends the people. It transcends all the buildings. It transcends all the infrastructure. It includes all those things. But really, to get that nation to be what it is, it starts with an idea. They always say America is the first nation that started as an idea. And by that, I think they mean that the ideas by which they thought the society would live by were actually created in to some degree before the society was actuated. If you think about like how the Constitution was created, the document was created in advance, and then we lived by that document. And it's really funny because it becomes an imagined order. Exactly. Right. So Hobbes is again concerned with the imagined order. And this theme of the imagined order is going to emerge again and again and again. And the imagined order is what? That we, with language, we create a series of concepts. They're created because they have no tangible existence, right? Um, things like love, things like because if you think about love, at the basis of it is biology. It's sex and reproduction and the perpetuation of the genes and the species, right? But when we have sex, we don't think I'm doing my duty to the species to perpetuate the genetic code. I don't think so. You have a whole series of romantic concepts, concepts of duty, concepts of love, concepts of family, what have you, that are built on top of the biological impulse, that make the biological impulse something way beyond just what animals do, right? So, for example, if you think of the Constitution of England, their whole notion of the Constitution was whatever the structure of the government was as the result of history. It was something that an idea that came after the fact rather than something that was essentially invented. Our Constitution was in a sense invented at the Constitutional Convention, and then it was set in motion and made real when people were compelled to live by its strictures and its rules, its boundaries, so on and so forth. Okay, so why are we move forward here and start getting to the meat and potatoes? Why are we looking at Hobbes and this particular story? He really does give us a kind of story about what people are like in a certain situation. So last class we looked at the kind of evolutionary foundations of human solidarity, human sociality, connectedness, the big glue that connects us, which are just to put it broadly, elements of culture, which include things like morality and any other thing you can think of. But what really connects us are not biological things, but things that emerge from our symbolic thinking, our power of symbolic thinking and language, right? So as an evolutionary perspective, and early on in this class, we're looking from this like a 40,000 foot perspective on human relationships. It's not very intimate. It's very broad. And what we're trying to kind of carve out here at the beginning is because when you think of relationships, we're thinking of like intimacy. We're thinking of boy-girl relationships, girl, boy, whatever it is. We're thinking of that banter of intimate relationships and the solidarity and what it feels like. And here early on in the semester, we're seeing like we're rising above that level of detail, and we're getting like the big picture of how all our relationships are defined by very broad circumstances, the circumstances of our basic human nature and the conditions within the world that we're stuck with, right? And immediately those two things, human nature and a human condition, two of the things that Hobbes focuses on, they immediately characterize a tremendous amount of our relationships with one another before we even get to those nuanced kind of private intimacies and emotions that we would consider. So here with Hobbes, we shift away from this evolutionary view to start dealing with some social and some political and some moral questions, right? And so I've never seen someone write this, and I don't know quite why, but morality and uh, so society, morality and moral and social questions is what I'm trying to say here, are really almost interchangeable. If you think about what morality is, it just has to do with notions of right and wrong, and that guide our lives in the course of our existence, right? And almost all morality does what? It says, do this, don't do that. Do this because it's good, don't do that because it's bad. Really simple, right? And when we talk about doing good or ill, doing good or bad, good or evil, whatever it happens to be, just and unjust, we're almost always talking about an action that is done toward another human being. So morality really is a direct function of society. It's a social product, right? These rules that we live by, because when rules regulate our behavior, it has almost always has to do with our relationships with other people. Of course, you could think about the morality or ethics of treating your dog, or how to treat the environment. But when we think of morality, almost everything we conceive of it in terms of relationships with one another. So morality is really so central, and morality is one of the most important products of language and the creative function of language. Okay, so let me just run through these, and we'll start talking about some things. So we want to touch a little bit on the historical background of this text to just give a little perspective. Um, then we just want to ask some questions about what the heck the state of nature is. What is it? Hobbes is describing this thing he calls the natural condition of mankind. And my basic question for the class is, well, what the heck is this situation? What is this condition? And when he says condition, he means like a circumstance or a situation that we're thrown into. We've got a human nature, that's like how we're made physically and psychologically. And then we've got a condition. We've got a situation into which human nature is thrown. And then because of the dynamics of those two elements, they automatically play out in a certain way, right? Then we want to talk about human nature, because this state of nature allows Hobbes to depict human nature in terms of what he sees really going on with what people are really like. You know, that what's that movie? What women really want, and men are too dumb to figure it out. And what's the guy? Mel Gibson is in it or something. So here it's not what women want, it's what human beings are really like. If you just ripped off the band-aid of society, this is what they'd really do. And it's what's really interesting is to see the psychological motors of human nature that compel people to act the way they do, at least as Hobbes understands it. So when we talk about human nature, we're going to talk a lot about human psychology, and particularly the Hobbes will identify these kind of core motors of motivation that compel us to do just about everything we might do in our lives as he sees it. And then we get in this discussion of the nature and origins of justice. And I mean, question of what is justice? It's some kind of system of distributing rewards and punishments based on people's behavior, right? And then a really interesting question that's going to be really important for next week that he starts to raise: what will compel people to follow the rules of justice, or what will compel people to follow the rules, right? Um, Imagine I'm just an ordinary person. I think I can break the rules and get away with it. And if I think I can get away with it, I'm going to do what I want. And Hobbes paints a rather bleak picture of humanity, that if they have the opportunity to do whatever they want, they'll do whatever they want, right? So it raises some questions about how we conceive of uh, our own sense of morality and where it comes from, and how much of it do we really have. And a lot of it might not just be in us, but a lot of it might have to do with circumstance, right? People act differently when nobody's looking. People act differently if they think they can get away with something. This will be a big theme that comes up next week. And of course, this all has to do with relationships in terms of good and bad. So let me just make a couple brief remarks and we'll get to the state of nature. So let me go here. So Hobbes wrote Leviathan, which is a much larger work that deals with the proper establishment of legitimate government. And government is the kind of authority that not only makes laws, but compels everybody to follow them, right? And one of his particular concerns was instability, anarchy, civil war, revolution that would destabilize society and not allow for the great the fruits of civilization to really take place, right? And it's important, his depiction, which centers a lot on fear and a lot of motives that seem rather, some of them kind of negative, and certainly the consequences are negative. And it's a kind of bleak image, right? What is his motivation for characterizing human beings in this way? And so he lived, I just have a couple notations here and I'll just kind of paraphrase, but I mean, he lived in a period of great political, social, civil conflict, religious conflict, any type of conflict you could name occurred during his era. He was born in 1588 and lived into the 1660s, I want to say. And it was a very dynamic and difficult period. I mean, he's English, but there was tumult and civil war throughout all of Europe. And let's make an important observation, especially we're Americans. And, America has gone through some various difficult times. We've been in wars. We've had 9/11. The threat of terrorism was a big deal for a period of time. Now we have COVID. We've had riots in the street over the summer. We've had an armed insurrection at the Capitol building on the infamous day of January 6th. So we have a taste for this, which is that Hobbes looked out and saw just how tenuous civil society was, how easy it was for it to break down and for anarchy and destruction to be unleashed, right? So he seems to have yearned for a world of order, stability, peace, tranquility. And of course, it's not surprising that he yearned for that, because every human being would, because of our we have some basic motivations. We want to survive, as he says. He talks about conservation and delectation. He says our two ends are conservation and delectation. So that was one of your questions. What the heck is that about? He says our ends are conservation and delectation. Any thoughts about that? Did we get to the questions?
That was
It's kind of like we want to keep what we have.
All right, so conservation, that's part of it. There's something even more fundamental, like keeping our property. Think about civil society. We have property rights. Why? Because we desperately want to keep our property, and there's a more basic reason why we want to keep it. Conservation has to do with conserving something, like you conserve energy. What's the thing that we're all determined to conserve? The most fundamental thing. The most fundamental thing.
Is it our safety?
And our safety, if we preserve our safety, then what? What are we really preserving?
Life.
Yeah, our lives.
Peace. Peace.
And what about power?
Yeah, so power we'll talk about. So let's get to, when he says our two ends, first of all, what does he mean by end? Any thoughts about that? He says our two ends are conservation and Delectation, words we don't use today. And one thing fun and challenging about this text is he writes in 17th century English, not in American 21st century English. What does he mean when he says our two ends? What does he mean by ends? This word is still used this way today, but it's not that common. Oh, so Jim says it, goal or purpose. Very good, right? So our end is, you could say, our destination. Our purpose is our goal. A purpose is something that dictates and organizes all our thinking and our action, right? When we have a goal, we arrange our lives, we arrange our actions and our thoughts toward achieving that goal, right? So an end is a goal. And when he says that our two fundamental goals are conservation and delectation, he's saying that these goals are given to us not by our own subjective opinion, but by our human nature. And conservation means to survive. And what he's really talking about here is self-preservation. He's making an obvious statement. The average human being wants to live. They want to preserve themselves. They will do what they have to do to survive. And of course, we see in this like state of nature environment that with it being so anarchic, that what you have to do to survive is pretty awful, but you're going to be willing to do it because you want to survive, right? And so things like power, things like property, things like safety are all part of the equation of survival. But really those concerns for things like property, power, safety, they all emanate out of the more basic concern or end of survival. Because why do I want power? Because I want to survive, because I'll use the power to perpetuate myself. And he says we're not just concerned. I mean, let me ask you, is your goal in life to just survive? Is your goal in life? Elliot, okay, good. Not really. I hope not. Number one, because you're human beings. And our goal as human beings is something beyond just mere survival. And number two, we're all in university. You're in university. You're all lucky enough to have certain opportunities, which means while life might not be perfectly easy or perfectly the way you want, you're not like out in the most desperate of circumstances on a desert island having to fend for yourself, to like get your next meal, right? Or we're not in some, terrifying nation somewhere on the planet that doesn't have proper government and there's a civil war and every day is a blessing that you stay alive, right? We let's put it this way, we take our lives to some extent for granted precisely because we're pursuing other goals, not because we really take life for granted, although that happens too, right? So he makes it clear we have two ends, not one. And this is what he's saying here has been said by many, many political philosophers, moral thinkers. We don't just desire for self-preservation, we desire what he calls delectation. And of course, who uses this word? What does this word delectation mean?
Pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure. Let me ask this. What kind of pleasure does he seem to be referring to? What kind of pleasure? What are the pleasures most people pursue? And I mean like a category of pleasures. Oh,
Luxury?
yeah, luxury is a good way of putting it, right? So conservation is about mere survival. Delectation has to do with luxury, which is something beyond just mere survival. You don't want to just live. You want to live pleasurably. You want to live comfortably, whatever that means to you. And of course, on a root level, it's the same for everybody else. Like everybody would like to have a comfy chair. Everyone would like to have, hot water and a hot bath, right? There's a lot of basic, and he seems to be talking, and let me just say, seems to be talking a lot about physical pleasures that come with a comfortable existence. He talks about the desire for commodious living, commodious living. A great word, commodious. Did I ask you guys to look that word up? Commodious.
Yeah, I
Yes.
think that was one of the definitions.
Oh, good. And what does it mean?
Convenience, roomy,
Yeah, either convenient or comfortable,
spacious.
right?
Mhm.
So we don't just want self-preservation, we want comfortable self-preservation. Think about what capitalism and the modern, say, American or world economy is all about. For a substantial percentage of all humanity is not just living hand to mouth. They have they've developed a certain level of comfort because our whole society is dedicated to economy, to producing wealth that becomes the stuff we need to live commodiously, right? And of course, the material realm doesn't satisfy all our desires, but it satisfies a whole heck of a lot of them, right? And of course, there are higher desires other than just bodily ones, but Hobbes focuses on that for now. So Aristotle, for example, says the human being does not seek just mere life, but desires the good life. Or the human being doesn't just desire to live, the human being desires to live well. And mere life or simply living is just survival. And the good life or living well is something beyond mere survival, which is the thing all of us are, lucky enough to pursue in one form or another, right? Because we're not living completely destitute. And we all have different opinions, right? You think about the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, all human beings created equal, and all endowed with certain inalienable rights from their creator, including life, liberty, and happiness. So the life and the liberty are the self-preservation part, but the happiness part, that's the delectation part, right? And the important thing is that those are motivations, right? We seek those things. And the important thing is those motivations, Hobbes says, come from our human nature. They're not things we choose. Those ends, those goals, those purposes, those things are built into us. And the way he describes it, those things are built into us biologically, right? Any animal would choose a comfortable existence over mere survival, right? I think it may not even be a choice. It's kind of hardwired in there to act that way, right? And even the scientific point of view, Darwin, while science doesn't acknowledge natural purposes to things, even Darwinian evolution, the theory acknowledges our natural desire to survive, right, in a certain manner. Okay, so let's ask this: the full title of this chapter, and I'm sorry I don't have the full title here. It says, "Of the natural condition of mankind, comma, as concerning their felicity and misery." As concerning their felicity and misery. First, let's start with the end. What are felicity and misery? What do those two words mean? What does felicity mean?
Being happy,
Yeah, felicity is just a fancy word for happiness. Misery, well, it's the opposite of happiness, right? What is he really? He's actually asking a question here. He's saying, is the natural condition of mankind one of felicity or one of misery? What's the answer to that?
I'd say misery.
both.
Both.
I think it's both, Professor.
Both.
You don't agree?
Let's take a vote. how many people, how many say it's the natural condition is a state of happiness? Can we do like thumbs up? Do you
Mine
guys know
works.
how to work the icons on this thing?
Mine doesn't work.
How would you do that?
Your icons are broken? Someone took your icons?
It's next to the button where it says record. So there's like an option that says reactions. You like thumbs up or like a heart or like raise hands.
On the
You
chat?
can make a poll.
Yeah, so underneath, so when you're on Zoom, you have
Oh.
like the option to see participants,
Oh,
to
I
tap,
see. Okay,
to share your
reaction.
screen, and then reactions.
Okay.
But
Thumbs up.
Professor, you can make a poll.
How do I
too.
do
You can
the
make
poll? This is too fancy for me.
I know you can make a
Oh,
poll
no,
and
it's-
make us.
The poll is like, it's starting to open up something on my browser. That, I hate to say it, but that's getting too complicated.
And I hit the thumbs up, but it doesn't work for me.
Okay, so people can just call out.
Cynthia, it did work. It came up with a thumbs up.
Holla,
Very
thank
good.
you.
You're welcome.
Professor, you saw it?
Professor, you saw mine
Yes,
too?
yes.
Okay,
All right,
so
so
what's
how
the
many
question?
people think the natural condition is a state of misery?
I want to say yes.
I do.
I want to say yes.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I do.
All right, so I think we're getting more like it's closer to a condition of misery.
I think so.
I agree too. It's a state of misery.
And let's just clarify this. Whatever it is, whether it's a state of happiness or it's a state of misery, the fundamental causes of the happiness or the misery have to do with two things: the circumstance of the condition combined with the fundamental motives built into human nature. Pretty much. There's the issue of power too, which is not just about motives. It's about your ability to achieve your goals, right? And motives has to do with ends. I'm motivated to achieve this end, right? So Hobbes, I think he takes the condition and he takes his vision of human nature, and then he like throws the chess pieces out there and sees how they unfold, something like that. And then he gets the answer pops out, whether it's a state of happiness or not. And okay, so we still have to answer that question because I'm not going to say anything more about it. We're going to read and find out the answer. I think the answer should become pretty clear. First of all, how would you describe this condition? What are some of its features? What is it like? What does it have? What does it lack? Because one of the defining features of this condition is that it lacks something really decisive that actually explains why it looks like it does. What is its situation like? Oh, come now. What is this situation like?
Every man is for themselves.
Okay, everybody's man for themselves. Jessley says a war with mankind, or maybe a war between mankind.
The lack of authority or any like
No
order.
laws.
Competition
Okay.
for resources.
Okay, good, great. So let's step back. It sounds violent.
Mhm.
Jim says anarchy. Someone else said every man for themselves. That sounds like anarchy again. Hobbes describes it as a war of all against all. It's one of equality. That's really important. And we're going to come back to that because he starts out with the theme of equality here. And actually, equality in human nature is actually going to be one of the causes of the conflict, interestingly enough.
You have to explain that to me, Professor.
Yeah, well, he does. And it may not be obvious when he explains it because his language is complicated.
Yeah.
But our natural inclination is to think that equality will breed peace. And it's the type of equality he's talking about too.
Yeah, okay.
It's a little different than what we mean by equality.
Okay.
Because when you say equality, your first question should be equality of what exactly, right? Because when we say equality in our society, we're talking about a moral equality, typically that everyone has equal worth, equal dignity as a human being, and therefore they should be treated equally under law with the same degrees of opportunity and so on and so forth.
Oh, okay, so I get it. Okay.
Yeah, so
Well,
he
listen,
hasn't, remember, there's no society. So we said one thing that it lacks is authority, right? And he says, what's the expression? He says there's no common power over these people to awe them into peace, something like that. But he talks about the lack of a common power. When he talks about a lack of a common power, what is he really talking about? What is the common power that keeps us all in place?
Laws.
Government
The
and
government,
Yeah,
obligations.
Good.
College.
Someone said ruler, religion, laws, and actually all these things go together because he's thinking of a world that's still theocratic, in which there's no fundamental distinction between religion and politics, right? And the two are founded on one another. Okay, good. So Cynthia says covenant, right? What they don't have is an agreement to accept the authority of government that would have what you would call the monopoly of coercive power, the legitimate use of force, right? So in the state of nature, we do whatever we want. And he makes that very clear repeatedly. And he actually even is so bold as to say, you are justified to do whatever you want, right? And the question is, why does he say that? There's a specific reason, because you may not have any alternative but to do whatever you want, because he accepts your desire to survive as given. And if your desire to survive is given and you have no choice about it, you should be able to do what you need to do to survive in a world where everyone else is doing exactly the same thing.
And get away with it.
And get away with it because, well, for him, there's no morality in this situation anyway. So getting away with it just means you get to survive another day. But the problem is someone's probably going to get away with it against you, and you won't be around to get away with it anymore. And it won't be a punishment against you. It will just be the red in tooth and claw Wild West here, right? So this has a kind of echo of the Wild West. You go out, like, people take the law into their own hands. The only difference here is, like, there is no law to take it's the law of might makes right and survival of the fittest, right? So we're lacking all the institutions of government, law, religion, an enforcement system, right, that would restrain people from conflict. Good. So let me ask this. So this is pretty good. How are people made to, this is a tricky question. How are people made to feel in this condition?
Fearful.
Okay, good. They're fearful. Now the big kicker, and for Hobbes, fear is this great motivator. And one reason people don't like Hobbes is his emphasis on fear as the kind of ultimate motivator of our actions. And of course, fear is just the desire for self-preservation turned inside out, right? And particularly, he talks about the fear of violent death. And the fear of violent death is just the kind of inverse image of our desire to survive, right? So fear, we're all fearful. We're all like anxious, you could say. What does the fear motivate everybody to do? Let me ask this first. Is everybody in the state of nature like warlike, and everybody wants to knock the block off of everybody else? Does everybody have the natural disposition to want to go and attack everybody else?
No, not really.
No.
Good. So we have to imagine that in this state of nature, there's like a bell curve of human nature, a diversity of human nature, just like we see in society, which is that there are some naturally violent, aggressive people who and there are other naturally more passive people who seek to avoid conflict, right? The problem with the state of nature is, well, first of all, I mean, people don't enter into conflict in the state of nature because they're evil. They do it, we're going to discover, because it's the only choice.
Survival.
Yeah, survival. Yeah, so Machiavelli was very influential on
Yes.
Hobbes,
Mhm.
right? Because they both recognize that it's about survival and it's about power to survive, right? And we're talking about the lowest building blocks of society here. And of course, what Hobbes wants is morality out of this. He doesn't really believe in might makes right. In fact, the state of nature is a situation of might makes right, and it's not a very satisfying one. So actually, what the right thing to do should be to give up this war for the sake of peace. It means we're going to have to give up certain rights, which means we can't do everything. But we're going to get the things that we really want out of it when we accept the rule of government. So you think about it, in this situation, we can go and bonk someone on the head. But when we have a government, we have to call the police. And the only people who are permitted to bonk anybody on the head legally are the police, except in self-defense, right? So even in our world, this kind of state of nature still exists. The moment somebody attacks you and like wants to kill you, and there's no police officer there to be there in a second, essentially you're in the state of nature. You're left to your own devices, right? Because in our society, and in almost all societies, you have literally the right to do whatever you need to do to protect yourself, within the bounds of protecting yourself, as opposed to trying to harm the other person maliciously, right? And of course, there's very specific legal standards for all that that get sussed out in the courtroom as to whether you really did that or not, right? So everybody's fearful, right? So the people who don't want to be in conflict are fearful. What is this situation going to force even those people who are not inclined toward conflict to do? What is it going to force them to do? So Diego says react. React how?
Is it to comply?
Pardon? Think about it. I'm a pacifistic person, or at least I'm not aggressive. If there's an aggressive person who comes toward me, I'm going to try to do the right thing. I'm going to try to like call the authorities, and they're going to deal with it. And what does that mean? It means I just stay out of the way.
Leave it in someone else's hands.
Yeah, you leave it in, a third
police-
party,
Yeah.
a third party who's been given the legitimate authority to do that, like an army, like the police, like the government, like the courts. And you stay, you just mind your own business, right? But in this world, there's no police to call. What is the person, I don't know, that wimpy person who's pacifistic, or just, that nice person who's pacifistic, what are they going to be forced to do in this society, or in this lack of society?
To defend themselves, you mean?
Yeah. Yes. And what does that mean? What are they going to do to defend themselves?
They would have to retaliate or
Okay, good. So you do retaliation when? When do you
When you
retaliate?
feel threatened.
What does
when you
it
feel
mean to
threatened.
retaliate? What does it mean to retaliate?
when
Or
you have
get
to
back
defend
at someone.
yourself, or like the gentleman said, when you feel threatened.
So, but retaliation you do after you've already been harmed in some way, right? So that's after the fact. Imagine this. The big guy comes over with his club and kills me. How effectively can I retaliate? I know it's a stupid question,
Yeah, but you
but
can't.
it's going to make a point. When you're dead, you can't retaliate. So what do you do to make sure you don't have to worry about that problem?
I mean, wouldn't you fight for your life to make sure you win?
So you kill.
Or you
Right.
find somebody else to group
Yeah,
with,
we're getting there. We're getting there.
to group with, so they
Let me
can.
ask this. What are the chances that you're going to have a violent conflict in the state of nature? What are the chances?
Pretty good.
Yeah, let's just say if you wait long enough, 100%. Are you going to wait around for that guy to come and bang your door down? And
No.
so then you can retaliate?
No.
What are you going to
Oh,
do?
well,
You preemptively attack him.
Yeah, you're not going to retaliate after the fact because you might be dead then. You're going to preempt him from doing it to begin with. And so what does it mean? The logic of this situation is, number one, it's rational to be violent because that's your only alternative, or in some type of strategy to defeat your enemy, because everyone, it's not that people hate each other in the state of nature. It's that the situation or the condition sets up a series of parameters that make conflict inevitable. And even you could say the nicest, most pacifistic people are forced to take up arms. And not only that, to do it preemptively, to strategize in advance what they're going to do to make sure they're not threatened.
but
Right?
if you strategize in advance, Professor, are you fighting to put fear on the other person, or are you fighting to kill?
It's really simple. You're fighting so you can keep surviving, and you make your own judgment about what you think the most effective strategy is.
Okay.
Yeah, so the answer, I mean, there could be
I got it.
all kinds of things. But yeah, if you run away, then you're showing someone you're not willing to stand up for yourself, and that might be a problem too. Maybe you kill a few people and you scare the bejesus out of them, and then they stay off you. But then what do? They come back tomorrow with 10 extra guys at your house, right? So good. All right, so we got an idea here. Let's turn to the text and just read from the beginning. I hope this is big enough. And so, interestingly enough, this natural condition also has to something with depicting our natural state as human beings. One thing he seems to be arguing is that when we enter civil society, which is what we don't have here, there are a whole series of large inequalities that are established as a result of civil society and its institutions, that if you stripped all that stuff away, you'd realize the fundamental equality of human beings, or at least the equality in this dimension. So he's actually making an interesting argument. Human beings are not unequal by nature. In fact, they're equal by nature. And what makes them unequal is not their nature, but the society that gives certain powers and authorities to certain people and not to others. And the way it distributes property, the way it distributes power, offices, status, whatever it happens to be that gives them power. And this is a really radical claim, because almost every thinker up to this point, thinking about political life, their first assumption was human beings are by nature unequal. By nature unequal. Of course, when you look in society, you see them unequal in a variety of ways. But the fundamental position, Aristotle and all these other thinkers going back to the ancient world, human beings are unequal, and therefore government, rulership should reflect that inequality. Since human beings are unequal by nature, it is natural to have masters and slaves, masters and servants, superior and inferior. We may not be able to eliminate all forms of inequality, right? But Hobbes makes a very powerful, it's ultimately going to be a moral claim that's going to feed into the American Revolution and the French Revolution in centuries later. But obviously, the fact that we're all equal has, for example, we believe in the rule of law. The rule of law says the same laws should apply in the same way to everybody, right? And I'm sure nobody disagrees with that. But in pre-modern times, or even early modern times, the rule of law was not equal for everybody. There were nobles and there were peasants, right? There were kings and there were serfs. And they had literally a different set of laws that applied to them based on their distinction in society, right? We talk about class differences. When you talk about class differences in the pre-modern world, you're talking about people who are subject to different authorities within society as opposed to the same ones. Okay, so this claim of equality is a really big and interesting claim. And of course, Hobbes claims that our equality actually leads to conflict. Equality leads to conflict, and nobody can, that seems rather mystifying. So let's read this and figure out how our equality leads to conflict. And first and foremost, what kind of equality is he talking about? Could somebody read for us? Is this big enough to read? Who would like to read for us? Can I have a
I'll
volunteer?
read for you, Professor.
Carrie?
Yes.
Wonderful. Go for it.
Nature has made men so equal to the facilities of body and mind as that though there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or of a quicker mind than another. Yet when all is working together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable as that one man can there thereupon claim to himself any benefits to which another may not pretend as well as he. For as the strength of body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret
Machination.
machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself.
Okay, great. So he says nature has made human beings so equal in the faculties of body and mind. So he's talking about human nature here, right? This is the way we're made by nature. And he describes human nature as being divided into faculties of body and faculties of mind. When he's talking about faculties, what is he talking about? What does he mean by that? Faculties of body and mind. That's important to understand. What is he talking about here? And I don't mean the details of, like, what does the word faculty mean here?
Would it be the well-being of oneself?
Not exactly, not directly.
Professor Art, is he talking about the way our bodies are similar developed? Basically, when it says faculty of body, meaning our structure.
That could be part of it. Yes, faculties are not quite systems. Any other guesses here? What faculties means here? You need to understand this word to understand exactly what he's talking about.
Your ability.
Yes. So synonym: ability, capacity. What's the aptitude, capacity. So nature has made human beings so equal in their abilities of body and mind. And what's another synonym for ability? Let me ask this: what are we really equal in here? Should I reread it before we answer that question? What are we really equal in when he says faculties of body and mind? Let me read. So nature hath made men so equal in the faculties of body and mind, our abilities of mind and body, as that though there be found one man sometimes stronger in body or quicker in mind than another, yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not so considerable, it's not so great, as that one man can thereupon claim to himself any benefit to which another may not pretend as well as he. What do we really, let me keep going. For as to the strength of body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself. So we're
Professor, are we talking about somebody's potential in this state of men being equal?
I think that's a reasonable synonym. I'm looking for a specific word. What are human beings really equal in? What's a substitute that captures all these issues of faculty? When we're talking, well, let me ask this. What are we talking about? We're talking about faculties of body or faculties of mind. Abilities.
The
What kind of
capability?
Yeah, what kind of abilities?
Power?
Yeah. So let's put a fine to it. Faculties of body, he mentions it. I don't know, strength, quickness, right? Agility, flexibility, whatever it happens to be that's advantageous. Faculties of mind, intelligence of one kind or another. And of course, we know there's a whole variety of different aspects to intelligence, right? That some people have some of one thing and some people have one another. This person's a book learner and this person is street smart, what have you, right? And what does this all have to do with Diego? And I think what someone
The
else,
mind?
yeah, has to power.
Power and the
We're
mind.
all equal in terms of power, right? What's the argument here that's very interesting? When we get into society, there is certainly not equality of power. But where does the inequality of power come from? It comes from the institutions and structures of society that give certain people more authority to wield, more power to wield, whether it's property, whether it's government authority, whether it's some job they have that gives them control over other people, whatever it is. It doesn't come from themselves. It comes from the institutions of society, the whole range. Okay, so we all have equal power. What is knowledge is not power? No, knowledge is definitely could be power.
So all men by nature have equal powers. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and notice how he says it. He says when everything is reckoned together. Like if you add everything up, one person has a little more of this and another person has a little more of that. But guess what? This person who's deficient here, they can compensate with some other ability they have.
Oh,
And this person who's deficient here can compensate with the other ability they have. And he makes this clear. So look at what he says. He says, as for strength of body, the weakest, look, even the weakest still has enough strength to kill the strongest. And he says, well, if he's not strong enough in like one-on-one combat, right? Like a cage fight or something like that.
Smart with mind.
He says he can kill him through secret machination or confederacy, which is to say what the weaker person is doing is compensating with their mind for their physical deficiency. And that's how they equal the playing field. And the question is, what is a secret machination? It's a great expression. What is a secret machination?
Conspiracy, trying to come up with a plan.
Yeah, it's just like a secret plan. Because if you want to kill someone, you don't come up to them and say, yo, I'm going to kill you. Well, actually, some people would because they'd be brazen and they want to show off and stuff like that. But the weak guy, if he did that, he couldn't pull it off. So what he does is go behind the guy's back, he gossips with some other people, and they cook up some plans, right? And therefore he compensates for his weakness. And then what is confederacy?
Alliance.
Pardon?
People who gather together for a purpose.
Yeah, simple. Yeah, so forget about the South for a second and the Civil War. It just means like banding together and simple logic, more numbers, more strength, right? When we look at the beginning of the Republic, one character is going to say to Socrates, do you see how many of us there are versus how many of you? And what the character is really saying is, we have more numbers than you. We have more strength and power than you. So you better do what we ask you to do because might makes right. Right. And so this is a world where might makes right. And the funny thing is everybody has equal might. Right. or effectively equal might. He doesn't mean absolutely equal, but over time, effectively equal. Okay. So then he goes on to talk about the faculties of mind. He's just talked about some faculties of body, strength and speed. So we don't really need to touch too much on this. But what we want to get to here is paragraph 3. Got it, Eliester. Paragraph 3, where he starts talking about we do need to talk about what is power all about? What is power? How would you define power? Influence over others? Power is,
Capability.
yeah, great. So power is your ability to achieve something in the face of potential obstacles that would try to prevent you from achieving it. And you have more power when you go up against something that doesn't want you to achieve what you're trying to achieve, and you achieve it anyway. By definition, you have more power just because you did it, and the proof is in the pudding. Now the question is, so it has to do with control. I definitely agree. Power for what? Power, let's be clear. Power is a means. Power is a tool. Power is an instrument. A tool for what? What are we trying to achieve in this state of nature world? It's like the world of the Walking Dead?
The power to survive.
Yes. So we all have equal power, and we all have the same goals: conservation and delectation, those two ends that are connected. And of course, in this world, I think we're going to feel lucky if we just survive. That's going to be pleasurable. But of course, ideally we want more than that. Okay. So power is a means to our ends of conservation, self-preservation, and some type of pleasure. So now at 3, he explains the consequences of our equal power, or our effectively equal power. And ironically, he explains how power leads to conflict rather than its opposite. And you're scratching your head, how can that be? Equality should lead to peace, because we're in a democratic society and we accept our equal status, and we don't step on each other's toes. Could someone read paragraph 3 for us? Could I have another volunteer?
I'll read.
Nina?
Nadira, yes.
Nadira, go for it.
From this equality of ability ariseth equality of hope in the attaining of our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies, and in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation and sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another, and from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more to fear than another man's single power. If one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty, and the invader again is in the like danger of another.
Okay, you handled it. You did a very nice job.
Thank you.
So from this equality of ability or power or faculties or capability arises equality of hope in attaining of our ends. What does he mean by that? Equality of hope in attaining our ends. Because this is the thing that's going to set in motion the conflict, or at least a big part of it. That's easy, right? What does it mean to hope for attaining our ends? We think what?
I think death or the ending of life.
What does power do? It allows us to achieve our goals.
To accomplish something.
Yeah, same thing. Equality of ability results in, let's put it that way, equality of hope in achieving our goals. Why do we have hope when there's equality of power? Why do we have hope that we're going to have equal ability to achieve our goals?
There's always someone competing against you.
Yeah. Okay, good. So this is under the premise of competition. Absolutely. And also of scarcity, right? It's clearly we're living in a world where there's not enough abundance for everybody to just go their own way and avoid each other. We're brought into conflict. And of course, we're going to discover that there are reasons for conflict beyond just needs. There's going to be people who desire conflict as part of their kind of ambition. We're in a competition. Let's put it simply, in this world of equality of power, why do we think we're going to succeed? Or why do we have a hope of achieving our goals in this competition with other people? Because what? Everyone is not exactly entitled. I mean, entitled. So Diego says everyone is entitled to reach their goals. Entitled implies like you have, it suggests anyway, you have some kind of right to achieve. And in a sense, you do have a right, but it's not like a moral right that's endowed on you by, Martin Luther King or someone, right? Or George Washington. It's like a right just because you have a desire to live and you have some weapons at your disposal to try to live. It's not like you're guaranteed it, obviously. Oh, come on. Let me ask a stupid question. I go out on the football field against Tom Brady. Can I hope to win?
Nope.
Hell no. Thank you.
I believe in you, Professor.
Okay.
Nope, not at all.
Hell no. Right? All right. So then I go on, Tom Brady goes on the football field with Patrick Mahomes. Who should hope to win that game?
Tom Brady.
Oh, a person after my own heart. Let's just say they're relatively equal, right? They're both
saying he cheated before in the last Super Bowl.
Oh, did he cheat again? Oh, come on.
Yeah, that fourth quarter.
Well, you know what that's called? That's called secret machination.
And it is secret machination.
When you're
got ties, like
when you're a tall white guy who cannot run, right? You have to do other things, right?
Well, it was 12 minutes. How they came up with 4 touchdowns? Like, that's crazy.
Okay, so if Brady is playing Patrick Mahomes, they're both, let's just call them equal, and we'll, the fine tooth debate we'll skip. They both believe they can win, right?
Yes.
Because they're both about equally as good. And on a certain day, one guy will win, and on another day, the other guy will win. So guess what? They have an equal hope of winning, of getting what they want. So what are they going to do? They're going to try to get what they want. So think about this world for a second. There's an apple on the tree. I don't necessarily want to get in conflict with my neighbor, but I want that apple. And if he gets in my way while I try to get that apple, well, then I'm going to get into conflict with him. I'm not trying to get into conflict, but if he gets in my way, I want that apple because I'm hungry, right? Now, if Andre the Giant, does anyone know who Andre the Giant is?
Yes, Professor.
Okay.
Anybody want
if
to
he's there, if he's there, I'm going to say to myself, gee, I'm not so hungry anymore. He can have the apple. And if I'm the Andre the Giant, I'm just going to look at the guy's eyes and he's going to run away and I'll say, thank you very much. But if it's 2 Andre the Giants, they're going to look at each other and say, you know what? He's about as big as me. He's about as strong as me. He's about as smart as me. And guess what? Let's say I have a 51-49 chance of winning because you add the 1% because like, that's what people do. Right. And actually Hobbes is going to talk about how people, they always think they're smarter than the other person. Right. So that actually enters in the equation. So then precisely because they're equal, they're going to be willing to go into the conflict because they think they have a decent chance of winning. Because if you were really outmatched, the consequence would be your loss of life if you entered into the conflict. So if you're really outmatched, the first thing you do is run for the hills. You don't go into conflict, right? So do we see how the equality is actually bringing people into conflict? Precisely because they've made a judgment that they all think they have a decent enough chance to win the conflict, and therefore they enter in the conflict to begin with. And of course, at some point, you can't avoid the conflict anyway in this world. So then look, he says, and from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more power, no more to fear than another man's single power. If one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come and be prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him. What does that mean, dispossess and deprive him of whatever stuff he has? What do you do when you deprive something of someone of something? Dispossess.
Not giving it to them, so they're lacking now.
Yeah, you either don't
Like
give
taking it away.
You take it from them because you say, look, I got a bunch of me and there's only one of you. We'll just take it. Thank you very much. And be expected. Yeah, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispose and deprive him not only of the fruits of his labor, but also his life or his liberty, right? Because if you think about it, if you're a criminal, it's very simple. If I rob from the guy everything that's vital to his survival, he's going to try to kill me. So if I'm going to rob from him, I better probably kill him too, or his liberty, and enslave him. And then notice, and the invader, which is to say the guy who just did this, like took somebody's house, plundered someone's house, the invader again is in the like danger from another. So it's this kind of permanent cycle of conflict that you can't get out of. At least for Hobbes, you don't get out of until you establish government where there's the rule of law over everybody. Okay, we want to kind of pick up the pace here so we can call it a day. Who is reading Nadira?
Yes.
Good, wonderful. Could you do paragraph 4?
You have to pay me. No, I'm just kidding. And from this diffidence of one another, there is no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation, that is, by force or wills to master the persons of all men he can, so long till he see no other power great enough to endanger him. And this is no more than his own conservation requireth, and is generally allowed. Also because there be some that taking pleasure in contemplating their own power in the acts of conquest, which they pursue farther than their security requires.
Okay,
If
let's just
others,
pause for a second.
Okay.
He hasn't said it just yet, but he's actually now explaining the 3 kind of fundamental sources of conflict that he's then going to sum up on the next page. And so the first one he talks about is diffidence. And we might just translate that as fear or insecurity of other people. And it's not just that we want to go be violent, it's that we are afraid of other people being violent against us, and that's going to propel us and compel us into conflict. And then the second one he mentions is that there are people who take pleasure in contemplating their own power in their acts of conquest. So these are the violent people, these are the ambitious people that actively seek out the harm of others because they take pleasure in it, right? Which is, of course, not everybody. You want to keep going, Nadira?
Yes. That if others, that otherwise would be glad to be at ease within modest bounds, should not by invasion increase their power, they would not be able long time by standing only on their defense to subsist.
Okay,
And
so what is he saying now? There are people who just want to get by, right? He describes people who want to live within modest bounds, right? So modest bounds, like it's living frugally. But he says these people can't just defend. They can't just react. They actually have to go out. How does he say it? Should not by invasion increase their power. They would not be able to long time by standing by only on their defense to subsist. So if they can't get by only on defense to subsist, i.e. to live, they have to take active measures. They have to be aggressive too. So that means everybody's forced to be aggressive, as Hobbes describes it here. You want to keep going?
Yes, and by consequence, such augmentation of dominion over men being necessary to a man's conservation, it ought to be allowed him.
You want to keep
Continue?
going?
Okay. Again, men have no pleasure, but on the contrary, a great deal of grief in keeping company where there is no power able to overawe them all. For every man looketh that his companion should value him at the.
Okay, so let me just frame this. Here he's going to talk about an issue, a psychological issue that doesn't have to do with our need of survival. And it's actually a social issue that is another source of conflict. And in a sense, this source of conflict is superfluous because it has nothing to do with our self-preservation. He's going to talk about our desire for recognition. We want to be seen as superior to other people. And that this is also going to lead us into conflict with one another. And this is not a bodily desire or a bodily need. This is a psychological desire, a purely psychological desire, desire to be recognized as superior. And the problem of recognition and being recognized and honored as superior is that for there to be a superior person, there also has to be an inferior person, right? And so this is going to be a source of conflict, especially if we're basically equal. You want me to read it?
I'll continue. Same rate he sets upon himself and upon all signs of contempt or undervaluing, naturally endeavors as far as he dares, which amongst them that have no common power to keep them in quiet, is far enough to make them destroy each other, to extort a greater value from his contemners by damage and from others by the example.
Okay, great. So let's just go back over that again. He says, for every man looks on his companion should value him. He looks at his friends, his people around him, and says, you should value him, should value me at the same rate that he sets upon himself and upon all signs of contempt or undervaluing, naturally endeavors as far as he dares to extort a greater value from his contemners by damage and from others by example. So recognition has all to do with recognizing the worth of someone, has to do with esteem. We talk about self-esteem. That's another way for self-worth. When we're talking about recognition, we want and we even demand that other people recognize our own worth. And he says this is a really interesting claim and a claim for conflict. He says that everybody wants other people to value themselves at the same rate that they see their own. Let me get it straight here, because he has the language is so convoluted. He says, for every man looketh that his companion should value him at the same rate he sets upon himself. Now let's ask a simple question. How much do we value ourselves?
100%.
What kind of value do we put on ourselves in our own lives?
Oh my God, I'm on.
Who do we value more, ourselves or the guy on the street?
Selves.
Ourselves.
Ourselves.
And does everybody have that same attitude, or is it just you?
Everybody has that.
Depends.
Okay. So this is the theme.
It depends.
It depends. So you value the random stranger on the street more than yourself?
Well, that's the thing. Like, for a lot of people, they value themselves more than a stranger. But what if you don't value yourself? Then you might value somebody else. Like, there are some people that don't value themselves. So that could possibly be something.
Okay, so when you get into children, you get into complicated things because our children are extensions of ourselves and they have deep connections with us. So this
About
is
your parents or your grandparents.
sure. So family, right? And that's why I said a stranger on the street. So this raises the theme of self-love. And who do we love the most?
Ourselves.
I think we love ourselves. And I'll give you a simple explanation as to why. Number one, we're the one person who's responsible for ourselves, ultimately, our life and death and our well-being. We're the only person who's going to take care of ourselves, brush our teeth, do all these things. Number one. Number two, so that's a basic self-sufficiency. We have needs and we have to take care of them ourselves. Like, imagine some weird things that you say, I care about another person. I'm going to do this for you, right? There's certain things that you just wouldn't do, except they were really intimate people, in which case they're very close to you and it's a little different. So then the other thing is when you experience pleasure, who gets to enjoy it? Stupid question, right? You do.
We do, yeah.
When someone else gets to experience pleasure, you're not the one enjoying it. So when you do something for someone else, I mean, there's a pleasure in that, don't get me wrong, but they're the one who gets to experience the pleasure. And of course, there are nuances. For example, like we feel good when people close to us feel pleasure, and that makes us feel good too, because we see their connections with us. But this issue of self-love, we all put a greater value on ourselves than other people. And you could call it egoistic, but if you think it through, there's some very rational reasons as to why that is. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't care about other people. But the thing is, in this game of recognition, he makes a really key point. He wants everybody else, each person wants everybody else to see the value we see in ourselves and see how much we love ourselves. And we want them to love us the way we love ourselves. Or he doesn't use the language of love. He uses the language of valuing or esteeming or the sense of worth. And the problem is that's a recipe for conflict because the person they value the most is not the other guy, it's themselves, right? So once we start making this demand that other people value us the way we value ourselves, that's a recipe for conflict. And the interesting thing about this conflict is it doesn't have to do with our basic survival needs so much as some higher psychological needs, to be social needs, to be recognized, to be seen and appreciated by other people, right? Okay. Nadira, you want to go on to 6 and 7?
Okay. So that in the nature of man, we find three principal causes of quarrel. First, competition. Secondly, diffidence. Thirdly, glory. The first maketh men invade for gain, the second for safety, and the third for reputation. The first use violence to make themselves masters of other men's persons, wives, children, and cattle. The second to defend them. The third for trifles, as a word, a smile, a different opinion, and any other sign of undervalue, either direct in their persons or by reflection in their kindred, their friends, their nation, their profession, or their name.
Okay, great. So what has he done in 6 and 7? He's actually just summed up in a tidy way everything he's just talked about in the previous paragraph. So these numbers are just paragraph numbers, right? So he says, so that in the nature of man, in human nature, we find three principal causes of quarrel. Number one, competition, and we should say competition for scarce resources. Secondly, diffidence, the fear of violence being done to us. And third, glory. So glory has to do with this issue of recognition, right? And recognition has to do with being valued. And glory is like the most extreme form of valuation. And one thing glory does is it makes people ambitious. People who are ambitious desire a high degree of recognition. And the interesting thing is, when you're ambitious to do something, it's not just that you want to achieve that specific goal, it's that you want everybody else to see you achieving that goal and to be celebrated, like you have an audience, right? So you think about athletes or musicians, when they go out, they're not just about sport, they're not just about music, they also love the adulation they get when they play. It's like a high for them. It's kind of like a drug. So he says, competition makes us invade for gain. So competition is like, it's offense instead of defense. And we want something additional. Diffidence, we invade for safety, which means we feel threatened and we have to take some kind of preemptive action. And then glory, we enter into conflict for reputation. And one of the problems of reputation is it's a zero-sum game. We can't all win the Super Bowl, right? There can only be one Super Bowl winner, which means they're in the game of reputation, they're winners and losers. And of course, nobody wants to be a loser, so they're inclined to fight. So the first use violence to make themselves masters of other men's, notice what we're after here, men's persons, meaning their bodies, like enslaving them, after their wives, their children, and cattle. The second, to defend them. The third, for glory. We fight for what? For trifles. What are trifles? Not to be confused with truffles. What are trifles? We enter into conflict over trifles. And what are the examples he gives of trifles? A word, a smile, a different opinion, and any other sign that we're being undervalued, either direct in their persons or by reflection in their kindred, their friends, their nation, their profession, or their name. Nobody knows what a trifle is?
Something that has no value?
Yeah, something, yeah.
Or that has little value?
Yeah, it's something that's like, yeah, I guess you're right. Insignificant, meaning like people will get slighted for the most insignificant things. What's recognition about? You want your props, right? You know, show me respect, right? And in that context, people will get upset over the most, what's a synonym for trifle? Something that's totally trivial, right? So Nadira got it. And we're going to finish up in just a few minutes here. So for example, I remember seeing a video of two guys fighting on the 6 train around 110th Street in East Harlem. And they were fighting over a subway seat on the subway. Now that in and of itself is not totally, surprising. But what was surprising was the video of the whole train. These guys were fighting, and this was like a real fight. This wasn't just like kind of bickering.
What do you mean the video of the whole train? The person that was videotaping it?
Yeah, so someone caught it on their cell phone, of course, because everything's on cell phones these days. I'm not going to say it. I want you to guess. What did you notice when the camera got a view of the rest of the train and they're fighting over this one seat? What did you notice about the rest of the train?
No one cared to jump in.
It was empty.
Yes. The whole train was practically empty, and it wasn't like it was packed and there was only one seat left. It was
Is it
like
true story?
there. Yeah, I saw it on the news. Everything in the news is true, right?
No, it's
So-
fake news, Professor.
So this was a respect thing. That guy, he didn't just want to sit down, right? He wanted that seat, and wanting that seat meant the other guy had to recognize that he was going to take it and had to accept that the other guy was going to take it. And they got into a fight over it, right? Because it's no longer about the seat, really. The seat is just the pretext. And the real drama going on is, are you going to recognize my superiority to you? And am I going to be able to put you in your place, literally, figuratively, right? So that's what Hobbes is talking about. I mean, look at this world Hobbes is described. I mean, this reminds me of some places I've been in Brooklyn where like I start walking away from a train station for several blocks and I realize there's like literally nothing there. And I know if anything happened to me, the police ain't showing up, right? There's a lot of places in New York like that. Especially like the ones you go, you're there the first time and you go, whoa, I didn't realize it was going to be like this. Okay, so that's important. So I want to just maybe 10 more minutes, and I just want to move into this discussion, and it won't take long, of this issue of justice that then gets, we have to answer the question now. Is this a state of felicity or a state of misery?
Misery.
Misery.
Yes, unequivocally. And he says here it's actually a state of war, right? And he has this great passage. Where is it? He says, in such a condition, right down here, there is no place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain. What is he saying? Nobody's going to create wealth. Nobody's going to create products in this world. Why? Because it's going to get stolen from them. So why would they do it? It's actually irrational to produce a lot of stuff. So let me just keep going. There's no place for industry because the fruit thereof, the fruits of your industry, the fruits of your labor are uncertain. And consequently, there's no culture of the earth. There's no farming. There's no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force. You can see his mindset here. No knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So that's a description of misery, right? So Hobbes' obvious conclusion is we don't want to be in this condition. And this condition is a description that explains not only why government is necessary, but why we should be willing to accept government authority, at least if it provides the security and the freedom and the safety that we want, as opposed to this situation. Let me just. So then he starts talking about the question of morality and justice. Is there any justice? Is there any morality in the state of nature?
No.
Tashana says no. Anyone else? Jim says no.
Nope.
Now notice, there's no morality whatsoever, and no one is because of the nature of the circumstances and the calculus of it, no one is obliged to follow. The only morality you could say is like every man for himself, might makes right, and self-preservation is kind of the only morality that everyone is entitled to try to survive. But of course, just because you're entitled to do it doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it, right? So let's just this will lead into the next, couple remarks from the next chapter. Could someone read paragraph 13 here?
I can read it, Professor.
Great, thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome. To this war of every man against every man, this also is consequent, that nothing can be unjust, The
Let's
notion
stop
of
right there. Nothing can be unjust. And let's make an important observation here that in the history of moral thought, this is a really radical claim. He's saying, actually, just because there's no government to impose standards of what's just and what's not, there is no standard of justice at all, right? If you were a theologian reading this, you would say that's absolutely not true in his day and probably today too, right? Just because there's no government to tell you what's right and wrong doesn't mean morality doesn't exist. But he says that when there's no government to enforce a code of justice, there actually is none.
the notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have their no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where no law, no injustice.
Okay, and when he's talking about common power, he means what? What does he mean by common power?
There's no law. There's nothing.
The common power is the thing that enforces the law. What is the common power?
The person that's giving authority, that has authority.
Yeah, the group of people, I mean, we ultimately call it some kind of government or state, right? And the interesting thing, it's going to be a group of people, and they're going to have the power of the state, and the average citizen's not, just like what we see in our society.
Okay. Force and fraud are in war, the two cardinal virtues. Justice and injustice are none of the faculties, neither of the body nor mind.
Okay, so this is interesting. He says that justice and injustice do not exist within the faculties or the abilities of the body or the mind. These things are going to be created concepts from language. They don't exist naturally, meaning they don't exist physically.
Okay, I didn't get that. If they were, they might be in a man that were alone in the world, as well as his senses and passions. They are qualities that relate to men in society, not in solitude, and is consequent also to the same condition that there be no propriety.
He means property. Yep.
No dominion, no mind, and thine distinct, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it.
Yeah, so he's saying since there's no law and there's no justice, there's also no property. So this distinction between mine and thine, it has to do with what's yours and what's mine, right? And that has to do with property. And since there's no common power to enforce the rules of property or the rights of property, then there's no property in the full sense of it, which is like something that you have by right and that no one can take from you. And if they try to, they get punished by the law, right? Here, there's just stuff out there and you try to hold on to it best you can before someone else tries to take it from you. Okay. So here. One second. So we got 2 minutes here. We're done. What's his solution to the state of nature? What do you think his solution is to it? How do we exit the state of nature so we can live in a world of commodious living, comfortable and convenient living?
To implement laws.
And what are we going to need to implement laws?
Contracts.
Yeah, so we're going to enter into a consensus agreement. We're going to consent to do what ultimately? To a kind of a contract or a compact, or he calls it a covenant. What are we going to create with that contract? We're going to create an imagined order. What is it? We're not going to create Peugeot, the car company. What are we going to create?
we're gonna create laws and like
What's
enforce them.
even more basic? Who's gonna create the laws?
Government officials.
Yeah, government. So we're going to create a government. We're going to create what would be described as a fully political community as opposed to society, right? And we're going to give government the monopoly of all the powers that we've been using in the state of nature, like powers of violence, powers to inflict harm on others. And we're going to give up that right. So in the state of nature, we kind of do have rights. We can do whatever we want. It's not the same kind of rights we have like in the Bill of Rights. It's just kind of a might makes right situation where if we have the physical ability to do it, if we have the power to do it, we have the quote right to do it simply because we can, right? Which is different from like a legal right or a constitutional right. So it has to be a common power over everyone. We have to have the rule of law over everyone so that nobody will try to, so there's a problem he sees emerging, which is, what about those people who try to keep acting like they're in the state of nature when they're civil society? And he has this concept here of the fool. And he says, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no such thing as justice. And he goes on in this paragraph to describe what the fool is. And the fool is a character in society who is now living in civil society with laws and government. And we are supposed to, in civil society, have given up the right to be permitted to do everything like violence and whatnot. Now killing someone is called murder. In the state of nature, killing someone is just called, that's what you do, right? Murder is a moral and legal concept, right? That prohibits, it means there are punishment for committing murder, as opposed to, say, self-defense, in which it may not be called murder when you kill someone. Right? So there's a difference between killing and murdering someone. But the fool says, you know what? I can have it both ways. I can get the benefits of civil society because the laws of civil society say you can't harm me, right? And I'm going to take advantage of that because that's great. And if you try to harm me, I'm going to take you to court or the police are going to show up. But then the fool says, you know what? I'm going to try to screw you over because I think I can get away with it. So Hobbes' problem is that even in civil society with law and police and all that stuff, he knows that there are people who are still going to try to get away with acting like they're in the state of nature. Is this a problem in the real world?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, all the time. And in some sense, we never completely exit the state of nature because the benefits of government and the rule of law are never always available to us. There's certain little pockets in society, whatever, a place or a time where you're not the beneficiary of the rules. And it's a kind of, you're back in the state of nature. You might be like that place where you're walking down the street and you know the police aren't going to show up if something did happen to you. So the fool says, I'm going to have the best of both worlds. I'm going to take advantage of the rules to benefit me. And then I'm also going to screw over people and I'm going to try to get away with it if I can. And so Hobbes becomes really concerned with how you deal with the people who the police don't catch, you could say, or the authorities don't see committing the act, right? And he has a great one sentence passage to wrap things up here to explain how to deal with them. And let me just, oh, I'm sorry. Where am I here? Oh, it's actually back. It's right here. Yeah. So right here, he says, therefore, before the names just, and notice what he says, the names just and unjust can have place in society. So he sees justice and injustice not as natural phenomena. They're not intrinsic to human society. They are names given to conduct once there's power to enforce the rules, right? Think about what a law is. A law is not just a bunch of words that says, don't do this. A law also consists of consequences, physical consequences that occur when you don't follow the law. So law isn't law when it doesn't have force behind it. It's just a bunch of words. And those words are, if they're not enforced, they're kind of meaningless, right? So the names of justice and injustice don't exist until we have the government to enforce the meanings of those words, right? So they're part of this imagined order that he's trying to establish to liberate us here. He says, let me just read again. Therefore, before the names of just and unjust can have place, there must be some coercive power, aka government, and something else too. It's coercive power of some to compel men equally to the performance of their covenants. And their covenant is their agreement to behave in society, right? When they break the covenant, they go to jail. Let's put it that way. How are they going to be compelled to follow the rules? He says this, by the terror of some punishment greater than the benefit they expect by the breach of their covenant. I'll leave it at that. Let me read it again. Therefore, before the names of just and unjust can have place, there must be some coercive power to compel men equally, have to compel everyone in the same way to follow the same rules to the performance of their covenants, which is to say, to the performance of following the rules. And how are we going to do it? By the terror of some punishment greater than the benefit they can expect by the breach of their covenant. Can anyone figure out what he's saying there? By the terror of some punishment greater than the benefit they expect by the breach, by breaking the contract?
So basically something that they wouldn't have thought themselves of terror. Like for example, I don't know, if I steal, I might get probation. But the law may enforce something greater and say, you know what, because you stole something, I'm gonna cut off your head. Just an example.
Cut your hand.
Okay, no, that example is perfect, right? You've got it. So justice is, that's what he's talking about here, is meting out rewards and punishments based on people's conduct. And the rewards go to people who are good, and the punishments go to people who are bad. And the rewards go to the people who follow the rules, and the punishments go to people who don't follow the rules, whatever they happen to be, right? And punishment results in pain, and rewards result in pleasure. People try to avoid punishment and because they want to avoid pain, and they seek out rewards because it's pleasurable, right? And he sees this in a really kind of primitive, instinctual way, right? The problem is the fool is sitting there saying, I can take my pleasure by breaking the rules and getting away with it, right? So he's saying two things that, well, let's just make it clear. The fear of the punishment has to be greater than the hope of the reward. So here he's trying to deter people before they act. And the other problem is, right? I mean, there's two problems. One, yes, if someone kills someone else, you don't give them probation because they'll go, boy, there was much greater pleasure in my homicidal impulse than there was pain in the probation. So you do the cost benefit analysis and you say, boy, that's a good deal. I can go kill people because all they do is give me probation. And then I go and I go to Central Park and I rake up some leaves and that's all I do, or whatever it is. You say, no, you're going to get life in prison if you commit murder. And then the person's going to scratch their head and they're going to say, you know what? The terror of the punishment is greater than the pleasure I take in doing the deed, right? And so what he's really concerned with is those situations where the authorities aren't present. He's not talking just about catching people when they do bad things. He's talking about deterring conduct simply by instilling fear of punishments in people's mind. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the murderer goes, boy, I feel like I really want to, I'm having my homicidal impulse, but you know what, boy, it's not worth it because I'm going to get life in prison. So I'm not even going to think about it, even though I have the opportunity to do it right here. Right. We would call it conscience. We would say, why do I do the right thing? Because I have such a good conscience and I have a good moral compass. He's explaining why people really avoid committing wrongs. And what's his answer? It's good fences make good neighbors. The people with the bad impulses are going to be deterred by the rules because they're afraid of the punishment. They're more afraid of the punishment than the pleasure that they're going to get from committing the crime. And he talks about terror. He wants to instill terror in people. You know, don't not wear your mask because you're going to kill all your neighbors. I don't know. That's a little controversial, but sometimes I feel like that's what they're trying to say to us. And, you know, there are states that are open and living their lives and problems aren't so bad. So terror, what kind of terror do you think he's talking about? What kinds of things instill, this is the last question, we're done. What kinds of things instill terror that would deter people from doing the wrong thing?
Taking their life away.
Okay, great. You know, throwing them in jail for life is a version of taking their life away. Capital punishment is another version of taking their life away. Yeah, lack of freedom. What's another way to deter conduct and instill the terror, the fear of what? What do we say? Instill the fear of
pain.
Even more than pain. Fear of death. Yeah, so fear of death, right? He relies on the fear of violent death, and capital punishment is a sense, it's not exactly violent necessarily, but it could be, but it's unnatural, right? When he says fear of violent death, we fear dying prematurely and not having lived a full life, and we still fear death anyway, but we're reconciled to it if we manage to live a long life. Yeah, fear of God. And the Leviathan, it becomes the name for the state that he wants to create. And he describes the Leviathan as a mortal god, right? That instills what's his primary task? To instill like the fear of God in people, to deter them from the violence we see in the state of nature, to keep them peaceful. What's one way religion, when the police aren't there to show up, encourages people to behave? What's one of the strategies in the imagined order of things? What does Christianity threaten people with if they sin?
They go to hell.
Yeah, they go to hell. So what's the logic of that? Well, okay, the police didn't see you, but God did, because God sees everything. And not only does he see you, he's going to make sure to punish you. And if the police didn't, and the the justice system didn't do its job, we're going to get you in the afterlife. And you're not just going to have a life sentence, you're going to have eternal damnation, right? And so what does Jessley say that produce? It produces guilt and fear of, doing anything that would incur that. And, hell is such a mysterious thing, because you sit there and say, is it real? Is it not? Do we want to find out whether it's real or not? Do I want to roll the dice that way? Or do I just want to be good and avoid ever having any reason to, discover it's real, and things of that sort? Right. And what's interesting in this text, and we got to call it quits here, you've done a great job, is that Hobbes entertains those kinds of ideas to enforce rules on society, that it's not enough to have like a police force. You have to come up with like a psychological mechanism of control. I'm maybe overstating it, but not by much. A psychological mechanism of fear of a certain kind to keep people to comply with the status quo, or to comply with the rules. This will be a big theme next week, but also when we look at 1984, where everyone is surveilled all the time. And even when they're not being surveilled, they have to assume they are being seen by Big Brother in 1984, and therefore they're going to adjust their behavior accordingly, and they're going to surveil themselves, right? When we say God is watching you, the key point about that is that the person who's doing the naughty thing has that aha awakening and say, oh my God, God sees everything I do. I better not do this, right? And they've internalized the whole logic of it, and you don't even need the police force then, because they regulate themselves. At least some people do, if they have a conscience, right? Okay, we should stop. Do we have any, and I want to thank everybody for today's class. Is really great. Anybody have any questions about any of this?
I wasn't too clear. You said the first point, the fear of pain greater than the hope of reward. And is the other one like to install fear of death?
So the point is, how do you get people to follow the rules, right? You have to have a situation in which they assume that the punishment is worse than the reward for breaking the rules. If there's no punishment, I'll go in and break the rules all day because I get rewarded without being punished. Does that make sense?
Yes, got it.
Okay. So Jim says, I will forever question Hobbes' bleak image or bleak idea of people. Are people really this bad? Do people only follow the rules just because they are afraid of a punishment? Or do people follow the rules because they think it's the right thing to do? Do they follow the rules for their own sake? People say, why do you do the right? You ask them why they do the right thing. They say, because I'm a good person and I just want to do the right thing. Or do we just follow the rules because we don't want to get punished?
Because we don't want to get punished.
Oh, yeah, that's Thomas Hobbes' dark vision of people. That's good fences make good neighbors. You're just like that neighbor.
But it's tricky, Professor. It's just
I'm being sarcastic, right? But we have a natural aversion to that neighbor in Mending Wall, right? And when we get to Hobbes, then we find ourselves kind of agreeing with him. And of course, the state of nature, I don't think I said, is like a condition without walls, right? It's very clear Hobbes, with law and order, believes that it provides boundaries to our conduct that allow us to flourish, to mend ourselves, to be a sophisticated society, to have intimacy with other. Look at the state of nature. We have all that freedom, but we have no intimacy because we're all at each other's throats. It's that intimacy is actually comes under a condition of having rules that limit what we can do. It's quite interesting. So Carrie says it depends. So this is, look, when you read Hobbes, we have to finish with this because we all want to go home at this point. It raises this basic question of how you view human nature that we saw play out in Mending Wall, whether you're more optimistic about the motives for humans and how they actually act, or whether you're slightly more pessimistic. And one observation should be made, that Hobbes doesn't talk anywhere here about like evil. He doesn't talk anywhere about people here being diabolical. He talks about basic impulses that everybody has to one degree or another, and that it's the mechanics of the situation that lead to the inevitable conflict. And it's not a bunch of hand rubbing Machiavells who are sinister and trying to intentionally harm people simply for their pleasure. Although the issue of glory and domination connected with it does start to touch on that kind of mentality, but he doesn't frame it in a terribly sinister way. It's a destructive impulse for him, but it's not like diabolical. Okay, shall we call it a night?
I guess.
Sounds
Well,
good.
I mean, if so, I mean, I figure people want to go. If there's a last comment someone wants to make, they're welcome to make it. Otherwise,
I just have a quick question.
absolutely, please.
Which books do we need? All three books by March 2nd? What's the third?
Yes,
Yes. All right.
it's
So
March.
Professor, we have to show it to you in class, like on Zoom, because I had emailed you prior. I had the PDF versions and I canceled it, so now I have the 3 physical books. So you want us to show it to you in class so we can get the credit for it?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
idea.
Okay.
So the video
I
should
have the
be
book
up.
now.
Video should be up tomorrow. Yeah, question.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor.
So, Professor, what if we don't have all three that day on time?
You just bring it when you do have it, and I'll mark it down. It's part of the participation grade ultimately. If nobody has any more questions, if you do, just stay on. If you don't, you can say good night. So good night to everybody. It's a lovely class. It's a great conversation, and get some good sleep. And we'll see each other next week.
Okay, so we'll see each other next week. Perfect.
See you next week.
So that'll be Wednesday again or Monday?
Wednesday.
Okay. Thanks.
Good night, Professor.
Good night, everybody. Thank you very much.
Have a nice weekend.
Question.
I just wanted to show you my books really quick because I don't know, like I just want to make sure I got the right books.
Sure.
So let me just put my camera on. Hold on, just give me a minute. Is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Oh, it is. Oh, shoot. Okay. Can you see this?
I can see your keyboard.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. Wait a minute.
Yeah, it's
Is
flipping back. It's flipping back and forth. That's from your computer.
Okay, what about now?
Just put the book in front of your face.
I don't even know what's going on right now. I
Put
think
the
my
book in front of your
nose-
face. There you go.
You see it now, right?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
yeah. So,
That's
oh,
a
okay.
symposium.
That's the
Yeah,
symposium.
that
That's the right
one.
book.
And then,
Yes, that's correct. You got
Okay,
it.
I got that one too. Okay.
And yes, I think that's what the latest version of this looks.
Yeah, that's the
Mine
one
looks
I
a
have.
little different, but that's the book.
okay.
Yes.
Professor, do you want to see mine or next week I can show it
You
to
know,
you?
if we could do it next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good
That
night.
works all at once. Good night. Thank you,
Okay.
Cynthia.
Okay, good night. How do I get out?
Good night. Good night. Oh, wait, Professor, I just wanted to say something. You said something very interesting because you said that he doesn't really say that speak on evil. I don't know. It kind of conflicts with me because I am a Christian. So it's very interesting to see
Well,
the
what specific part conflicts?
No, like when you said that, like he doesn't look at everything that he's looking at is not from point of view of people being like naturally evil.
Yeah, that's
So
a
I
good
found
point.
that very interesting. I'm like, that's so funny. And I said to myself,
So let me put it this way. Let me put it this way again. And I agree with you. He diverges from the traditional Christian understanding, particularly as it developed in theological thinking about things like natural law. He doesn't seem here to recognize evil as in like hand-rubbing diabolical behavior. We have impulses that, if not managed in the right way, lead to conflict. And that's not good, but it's not, he doesn't seem to understand it as evil. These human beings in the state of nature, they're not good or bad. They're just what they are. This is just what human beings are like. And if you want to have a civil society with peace and industry and all that stuff, you need to manage these motivations and the circumstances in a way that mitigates them as much as possible. Right?
So back then,
So he treats it almost from like a technocratic point of view. He's not interested in, he doesn't recognize the sinful nature of man. He recognizes the problematic nature of mankind, which is a little different because sin means like a sense of guilt for what you are, in a sense, the flaws of human nature. Whereas he's saying, you know, these are imperfections, but they're not things we should be, we shouldn't feel guilty about them. We should just solve them. Something like that.
But he knew that it was wrong, what was happening, right?
Well, I mean, it's wrong from the sense of a really basic, I mean, this isn't the totality of his text, so we're looking at one snippet, but I mean, it's wrong from the sense of the basic self-interest of human beings. From his point of view, is that human beings have this drive of survival and comfortable survival, and that needs to be recognized. And to be honest, I mean, our instinct towards self-preservation is a natural, it's like a natural law. It's like a force of nature. So it's like going against gravity. You have to respect, you can't go against gravity. So you can't go against self-preservation. You have to respect it. And of course, I mean, he's just respecting the natural impetus of everyone to want to live. The big twist he gives on it that is kind of moral is that it's in a condition of equality, right? I mean, he essentially recognizes by saying equal power that we do have a kind of an equal worth as a result of that, and that the law and the government should reflect that. He believes in the rule of law equally applied to everyone in the same law. And this is in an age where you have nobility and you have commoners and you have peasants. Class distinctions. When we talk about class distinctions in our society, that's like what economists talk about. But there's the class distinctions we have are not legal distinctions. In the pre-modern world, class distinctions have a legal, that you get treated differently under the law, right? Like in England, you have the House of Commons and you have the House of Lords. The House of Lords are noblemen and they live by different rules than the commoners do, at least, you know, in going back to maybe 18th century. So he's recognizing that fundamental recognition of equality is, you could say, progressive for his day, right?
Okay, I think I got it. It was interesting. I appreciate it.
Yeah, right. It's very
I wish we
interesting.
had the slides though, because that would have helped me tremendously. Like the pictures with the PowerPoint.
I have it up. I put it up earlier today.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the PowerPoint I put up last night.
Yeah, I'm gonna read that again because it was interesting and kind of like wow, like it was just like a big wow for me.
What part of it?
I mean, the whole thing, the way people had, this was just to me basically a survival tactic. Like in order for these people, the men, to be able to survive and to live, they were always worried that something was going to happen. Like I read a part where they will go to sleep but still worried about somebody coming in and taking what's theirs. You know, like it's weird how you have, it's just like living in my house, like when I don't lock my door and you know, I'm in a nice area and I worry and my husband's like, you don't have to worry, we live in a nice area. And you always have to worry. You know, back then.
Yes, I mean, some of these issues never completely, but obviously they're not in the forefront of our mind the way, I don't know, imagine us in a war-torn region, you know, somewhere on the other side of the globe. And then the other thing is, you know, all these same things apply, these same psychological motives in terms of the competition of society. And it's not a game of life or death, it's a game of success and economic well-being. If you look at like most of our lives and most of society is geared toward some form of economic competition. I mean, if we get a job, someone else is not getting the job.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it feels more direct than other times. But I mean, all these same features play out in a peaceful society too, just with different consequences. And obviously it's not so dire. So it's not going to feel, it's not so terrorizing. Like you do have a basic sense of security that he emphasizes is lacking here, because that causes people to act a certain way when they don't have it.
Right.
Okay.
Hopefully I got 100 on this one.
Thank you, Professor.
Have a wonderful evening.
Sophia, did you have anything else you wanted to say about coming from your perspective and your observations on what Hobbes has to say?
It's not. I was thinking the same thing too. The other thing I wanted to touch up on really quick was the name Lavanican, because it's so funny because I think a couple of weeks ago I was just reading that in the Bible, and I found that so funny how he calls the chapter Lavanican or the book. Am I wrong? The chapter or the book?
Leviathan, yeah.
Leviathan. There we go.
Yeah, so I mean, I know Leviathan from the book of Job.
Right.
And it's a kind of like worldly monster that terrorizes over people in the same way that he wants to instill a certain type of fear
Right.
over the people. And the Leviathan is some kind of monster of the terrestrial world rather than in the heavens or something.
Right.
And of course in Job, it's a very odd, the emergence of that, of Leviathan. And I'm not an expert
Right.
any means, but
no,
yeah.
but it's kind of like in that sense, if you talking about Job, it's like an evil presence or whatsoever. But I found that interesting because it's just like you want to install fear into people. So are you letting it known up front? Because for me, if I hear that firsthand, I'm running away. Like, you want to put terror in like around me? Like, no, I don't want that. Like, you're trying to come up with a power where you're trying to create yourself I should say you're trying to create an imagery of you trying to be impose yourself as a monster and installing fear. If I heard this like up front, I'm like, no, I do not want this. But I just
Yeah,
find
well,
it so
I mean, who's gonna on one hand, I totally agree with you, and his emphasis on fear really shapes in the rest of this book the type of political order that is fashioned. And it is totalitarian is too strong a word, but it's really obsessed with the concern of security more than freedom. And it's really determined to clamp down to inhibit any of those mentalities that would lead to conflict. And he doesn't like conflict because of the world he lived in. And for example, our founders had a different relationship with conflict. They actually they expected a conflicts of certain kind into society, and that was a product of freedom. On the other hand, you could make an argument: who really fears the hellfires? Who fears capital punishment? Well, you could say, I'm a good person. I don't fear those things because I didn't do anything, right? The people who are going to feel the fear are going to be the people who are inclined to do something.
Who do wrong, yeah.
Whereas the good people, they're going to internalize the fear, and it's going to settle in with them, and they're just not going to do bad things, and they're not going to recognize it as fear. It's going to come out as, I'm doing the right thing and I'm getting the benefits of doing the right thing. Right?
But nobody's perfect. I mean, I feel like everybody has that one thing is like, you have to think twice before you do. And
oh, sure. So with everybody, there's some issue that you're not convinced that it isn't worth it to break the rules.
Right. So I don't know, but it's just interesting.
Well, to be continued, because we're going to pick this theme up next week in a slightly different way.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Good night, guys.
Have a good night.
Sophia, I'm going to send you an email because I have a question for you, okay?
Okay, no problem. Definitely.
Right.
You have it?
I do, yes. Good night, Professor. See you Wednesday.
Thank you. Good night.